Hi, everyone. Welcome to the College to Calling Summit. My name is Miko Lau, and the purpose I created this summit is to inspire, educate, and empower fellow college graduates and people in the early 20s to discover how to live a successful, abundant life centered around the passion and the calling. And today we have a very, very special guest here with us. His name is Evan Stewart. Evan is a master strategist, trainer, and expert closer with years of experience running his book of business worth tens of millions of dollars. And he also helped other people do the same thing. And Evan is recognized as a leader in both personal and professional development. And he leveraged his expert guidance to scale companies over 1,000% to multiple 7 and 8 figures. And his personal mentorship has been coined the invaluable element that professionals can use to fortify their minds and attack their aspirations. And Evan is also the founder of Obsessed Academy, where he teaches people how to build a life that they can be obsessed about. So with all of that being said, I cannot wait to jump into this interview and just pick Evan's brain to talk about how he was able to achieve so much success in his life and how any of us listening right now can also build that life that we can be obsessed about. So Evan, thank you so much for being on here today. Really excited to have you.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm so grateful when you reached out. Really excited about the opportunity. And I think what you're doing is powerful and necessary. So I'm very glad to be here and be a part of this.
Thank you so much. So let's jump straight into the interview. We talked about this off camera earlier. I just found out that you're actually not even at your 30 yet, and you have so much success already. And that's really inspirational coming from someone. I'm only 24, 2 years younger than you. So how did you achieve all these success? What were you doing before all these success in your life? Like, where were you emotionally, mentally, professionally? Who was Evan back then?
That's a great question, and one that I've been getting a lot because a lot of people coin me or they'll pin me down at 32 to 33, maybe 34, somewhere in there, and I'm not. And part of that, like you'd said, really was from a specific upbringing. I had some really good mentors in my life. I come from a long line of entrepreneurs. And so growing up, the conversations that I was having with the people that were important in my life wasn't just, oh, well, tell me about school and let's go play games and things like that. It was like one of my first mentors, my great uncle, was an amazing, powerful voice in my life. He passed when I was still, much, much younger, but we had some good time together. And he had this lake house. And we would go down and we'd visit in the summers, school's out. And I remember distinctly, we would always play cards. He was an old school guy. We would just sit around, we'd play cards, and we would just have soda and stay up too late, and it was a great time. But the reason why it was important is because as people have asked me this question, I started reflecting back on my life and recognizing these little moments that were impactful. And those were because we'd play cards and he'd say, well, tell me about what's going on in school and whatnot. And I'd tell him, well, what problems are you having? He'd ask. And I'd say, well, maybe there's a girl I liked, or it was that this class had this, and I would start talking about problems. And then we'd be playing cards and he'd be dealing cards, and he'd be thinking, okay, well, who else has this type of problem? Well, my friend so-and-so, or my friend so-and-so, okay, well, how much do you think that problem's worth? And I said, well, what do you mean? Well, how much would they pay you to solve that problem for them? We'd start having these conversations where basically in a really almost juvenile sense, it was identifying problems, bringing, a real market problem, so to speak. I know it's a market problem because I have this problem and my 3 friends have this problem. Identifying a problem, bringing a solution, and then establishing a value to that solution. And so my great uncle was an entrepreneur. We'd have these conversations. My father was an entrepreneur. We'd have similar conversations. And so my whole life was, what problem do I solve? What service do I provide, or product do I bring to the marketplace in order to actually bring financial freedom to myself and to my family? Not where do I get a job? So that has really been deeply intertwined into my DNA and looking for opportunities and problems. And so when you have that type of a mindset, the great thing about that mindset is you obviously share this mindset, and many of the people that are watching the summit share this mindset, is that transcends age. because you can identify opportunities and bring solutions. And the great thing about that is that there's no floor and there's no ceiling. You can get started when you're 60 or 70, and you can get started when you're 13 or when you're 8 or when you're 15 or when you're 20. And I just happened, was blessed with an opportunity to get started earlier. So that was me when I was younger, was looking for problems, and that really, those types of opportunities and mentors really shaped who I am today.
Wow, that is so powerful. And I can really see how that can really shift the way that you approach life with that mindset, because I grew up in a environment and the idea that the only way to build success and wealth and financial success is all just go to college, get good grades, and get a job. And I realized that that was really not the reality, that fantasy that so many of us have been promised. When I graduated from UC Berkeley just 2 years ago, I was faced with the idea that there was limitations to how much I can earn and the impact that I can make. And I love the fact that you said this is something that all of us can do, just identify a problem, find the solutions, and just go at that. So what gave you the inspiration to start doing the specific business that you end up doing? I know you help coach other people to scale the companies. How did you get into that?
Right. Well, I've built and exited multiple companies by this point. And so, like I said, I got started young. And even in high school, I had teachers on my payroll that were making more working for me than they were for school. And so by the time I was in college, I had built companies, managed product, managed people. I knew what happened when you had multiple people going after the same deal internally and it caused conflict. I knew what happened when laws change, when contracts change. And so I distinctly remember I was sitting in class at school and just feeling like I was wasting my time, because I went to school for entrepreneurship, which is kind of an ironic concept, because entrepreneurship by default is taking action on things and moving, not sitting and hoping and learning that one day you might be able to fix a problem. And so unlike you and many of the individuals watching this, I actually dropped out because I was sitting in class. And I remember there was one day in particular, 2 things happened back to back that just killed it for me. One was I was listening to my professor teaching entrepreneurship, talking about the things that he said to be correct when I had been there and done that, specifically employee conflicts and managing conflict and managing products and managing people. And I thought to myself, this works great in theory, but it sure doesn't work when the actual environment you're working in, it's an organic, evolving thing when that changes. And so I recognized right there that this professor that had been teaching for 43 years was teaching things that were outdated. And then immediately after, I went to a class, which was an astronomy class, which honestly I didn't care at all about because I wanted to run a business and impact lives. And the teacher was gone, so he hired a substitute that was watching funny videos about turtles on YouTube. And so I sat there thinking, okay, I'm spending tens of thousands of dollars and years of my own time. At the time, I wasn't in a relationship, so I had no real spousal commitments. I had no children. I had nothing to do except just work. So all of a sudden I was thinking, why I can always go back to school. We all know people who are 40 and 50 and 60 that are going back and doing something, but I don't have the freedom now to bring my life down to zero and only have myself to worry about. And so then I left. And so as far as what brought me here now, it was that over the last 7 years, I had built a really significant book of business in real estate. So I've become, from an agency standpoint, the top 1% of agents in my state. I worked with very high net worth people, very high net worth products. I was closing tens of millions of dollars worth of deals and living the good life, supposedly. But I really didn't like how I was working. I was making all this money and happily married now, 2 years this last October, to an amazing woman who I missed a lot of our first year together. And I missed seeing her. And 4 years ago, I felt that I was being called to move to something different. And while business is great, my personal gift is identifying a giftedness in other people and then helping them equip their life with a structure that allows them to play into giftedness instead of default to weaknesses. Now, from a professional standpoint, shortening sales cycles, working with executives, helping the CEO refine the mission of the organization, fixing processes, that's all fine and good. Part of that is just how I grew up in building businesses. I had that experience so I can help other people. But deep down, I really desired to help other people kind of find this giftedness, living a life you can be obsessed about, as I call it. And because so many people talk about being better or living this great life, but very few people actually can bring a tangible and implementable strategy as to how. And I recognized that I had a gift to be able to do that. And so this year, 2019, we sold the real estate business and exited the company and started something completely new, completely from scratch. And it's just taken off. It's what you now see as Obsessed Academy. And we've got clients that we've got new clients that are building companies worth billions of dollars. Literally, we've got clients that were worth hundreds of millions, and then clients that can barely afford to pay a $30 or $40 or $50,000 a year salary. So we're really making an impact in a way that's deeply fulfilling. My wife is an amazing, her gift is in processes, so we can work together. And so what brought us here, kind of a long run around a short walk explanation, but what brought us here was that desire to really leave a more significant impact and be a catalyst for inspired people to really change the world that they're working in. I think we need more of that. And it's our responsibility to be those people if our gift lies in that way.
Oh, I love it so much. I can even sense that shift in the energy from you talking about that different businesses that you have done. Would you say like back then you were more so chasing after success in terms of like financial, the monetary results, but now it's something where you really want to give back and leave that significance, that impact on others? I guess my question for you would be, what was your definition of success like back then when you first started this entrepreneurial journey to now? Has it changed over time for you?
Yeah, it has. Great question, because that's something that I think more people should touch on. Because at the time, my father's an entrepreneur, but my mother and my father are extremely educated. Now, there's a difference of education outside of a collegiate standpoint, but I'm talking like multiple master's degrees educated. And so when I go to my parents and I say I'm dropping out of school, that's not a conversation that went over well. And so the beginning of this journey was I need to financially prove that I'm not absolutely, asinine for making this decision. And so a lot of it was that financial reward of just absolutely needing to prove. But then what happens is that typically what I find, people who are truly chasing the financial reward are trying to overcompensate for, like when I talk about a healthy and an unhealthy obsession, they're trying to overcompensate for feelings of shame or guilt or abandonment. They're trying to overcompensate for their identity not being grounded in themselves, but being grounded in others' perceptions of their reality. So when I'm trying to chase that income, I made great income. I made fantastic income, but I was overcompensating for my identity not being grounded in myself. I was overcompensating for overcoming those feelings of almost shame because I wasn't living up to someone who was important, their expectations. And so the value in which I measured myself by became fleeting. And so when I think of success, has a perspective changed? It has, because without going too far down the rabbit hole, I'm a person of faith. So my version of success is grounded in my faith. And so I believe that if God has a distinct calling and a hand on my life, then I need to be obedient and move in direction and alignment to that. And I believe success, monetary reward can follow and does follow impact. I believe that it is important to make money because money is opportunity and you should be wealthy. There's nothing wrong with that. But the money is a byproduct of your impact. And if it becomes the goal, then what happens is everything else that you have in the process of achieving that, everything starts to shed. The important and the non-important, but everything starts to shed away to where, the only thing that you're potentially left with is just a handful of cash. And that's a pretty empty life. And that was one that I started to recognize I was living. I had all the nice things, but, the interesting thing that happens when you start making really good money is, we're thinking to ourselves, man, I'd love the Aston Martin and the nice house and all that. But what happens when you can buy it is it's almost like a dog and a mailman, right? The mailman stops and the dog gets up to him. He just stands there, his tail between his legs. You lose the excitement of actually going after those things. Because imagine it's like you going, or an individual, you go to Target and you buy shampoo. It doesn't really mean anything. Like, oh, this one's fine and oh, this one's fine. It's the exact same, as funny as it sounds. Like, oh, is it a Porsche or an Aston Martin? Or, oh, is it this or oh, is it that? Because the thrill of achievement isn't there anymore because it's such a small microscopic point of everything else. It almost doesn't matter anymore. And so it's a really interesting thing that happened is once you start chasing that goal, and then once you actually achieve it, it really becomes hollow, because like it doesn't mean anything to buy those things anymore. And not to mention, when you're playing at those levels, like there's always people above you. Now people are buying jets instead of Porsches, right? So it's like, what now?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And it's funny because I just had this realization not too long ago. I realized that I was really chasing after the external success, like getting the degree, building multiple six-figure. That was my goal back then. But only to realize that true value and true impact is our connection to our higher calling, our purpose, and to really make that impact coming from that standpoint. So our listeners listening right now, they might be wondering, like, that's great and all, but how can we get in touch with that calling? How do we discover what it is that we truly came here to do, instead of really just listening to what others say, like, here's the way to get success? How can we tune into ourselves and get to know our calling?
That's a good question. That's a really good question. And that falls into what I talk about, which is a giftedness. And so when I'm talking about gifts, I'm not talking about strengths. I'm talking about undeniable, interwoven and locked into your DNA strengths that are so just deeply intertwined with who you are that they become inseparable. What I'm talking about are the things that you can do unabashedly better than anyone else, and it takes you no effort. I'm talking about the people whose minds are wired in such a way that they can look at an unbelievably complicated math problem and solve it immediately, when the rest of us are sitting down trying to work things out and we can't wrap our head around it. I'm talking about the individuals who are so good about having such a deep level of empathy that you can say anything and they can always cut straight to the core. I'm talking about how you have such an intense level of logic that regardless of the emotions in the situation, you're always thought of the voice of reason. I'm talking about how you are wired in a way to where you always see the positive, and so you're looked at as the person in your group of friends that can always bring that silver lining back to negative situations, and you become a leader of positivity among those that are going through emotional hardship. I'm talking about a giftedness. It's a fraction and a shimmer of God's grace and how it plays out in your life every single day. And so what you're talking about is everybody has it. It's just a matter of whether or not you're listening to it. And so what I would recommend, if there's somebody that's watching, that's listening to this, that's thinking, where do we start? There's a concept that I work through that I call threads of consistency. And it are these moments in your life where you've touched your gift, whether or not you've known it. And conceptually, what does that look like? Okay, so going back to one of our examples, maybe you're that person of silver lining. Well, touching your gift would be, you just think back in your life, whenever my friends are in need, they come to me. Whenever there's emotional hardship, they come to me. I'm the voice of reason. I'm the voice. Don't be humble here. Like, know when you're good at something, right? This is maybe, people come to me for this. People come to me for this. I'm always here. I'm placed in these situations where I'm able to bring peace. You start to recognize those are threads of consistency. Okay, so we identify the threads of consistency. What's the concept that we're actually working with? So the concept there would be a person of deep empathy, a person that maybe can identify joy. And so when we start trying to identify gifts, if you have a true knowing that you're somebody who has a deep understanding of how people are wired and an ability to bring joy into the lives of other people, regardless of circumstances, well, now you know how to build a life that plays into that giftedness to where you can truly impact and improve the lives of other people through how you're wired innately. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. And I think that a lot of it comes down to paying attention, being self-aware, and just noticing when little things that we do gives us that feeling of aliveness and excitement just from inside. So now that leads up to our next question. This was a question that I personally think about a lot when I was finishing up college, coming to the real world. I was thinking, this is something that a lot of people tell me, like, you can't do what you love and make money at the same time. Like, you have to settle for something stable, secure. And that's something that I started to believe as well. I didn't think that it was possible to do something that's true to myself, that I'm passionate about, I'm interested in, and at the same time make a lot of money. So how do we really turn our calling, our gifts into something that is a profitable, sustainable career path that we can really live off of. Not only live off of, not only survive off of, but like thrive and be abundant in that lifestyle. Because I know you said that you believe in professional development before personal development. We need to have sustainability in the income. So how do we go about doing that?
Absolutely. And then what you're referencing there is, I have a saying, which is personal development goes out the window when bills come in the door. So you need to, if you're truly trying to build your best self, what I'm really alluding to there is the rest of your life has to kind of somewhat be stable enough for you to have the grace, space, energy, and attention to dedicate to growing yourself that way. So I love the fact that you brought that up. But in the previous question, what we're talking about is a giftedness. Notice I'm not talking about finances, because they're separate initially. And this is what's important here. So to get a little bit more tactical for those that are listening that are thinking the same question, just because you have a gift does not mean that it is going to immediately be rewarded. In fact, usually it takes more time than not, because when you're dealing with something that has so much depth, most people interact on the surface, which means it's going to take you a while to bring that depth to a point to where it's recognized by more people than not that are able to buy and transact in regards to it. So that's just an important recognition. But from a tactical standpoint, it's also important to recognize that you might be in the wrong vehicle. So you might think, oh my gosh, I'm so good at this thing, whatever that thing is. I'm so good at this, and yet I'm not making any money, and I'm going to go and work my passions and all of that. Great. But you need to be in a vehicle that can properly reward you financially. If you're a race car driver and I'm going to throw you into an old 1960s beat up car, you could be the best damn driver in the world. You're not going very fast or very far. And so I encourage you to look at your environment and think to yourself, is this really the environment that allows me to play into my potential? Okay. So the tools that I use in mine is I need to be consistently fascinated, inspired, and motivated by where I live, where I work, and who I live and work with, and how I live and work. So if that plays into my inspiration, fascination, and motivation, I know by default that I'm playing at a high capacity. But then from a business standpoint, we're monetizing my gift and bringing it into other people through Obsessed Academy by creating an organization that allows us to immediately go in and work with organizations and people. That's a vehicle that allows us to play into our strengths. Okay, if you're a person that's watching this and you think, I'm not a business owner, fantastic, hire one. Or you think, you know what, I'm not very good with that strategy, no problem, find somebody that is. It doesn't mean that you have to be great. I know plenty of artists that suck when it comes to business, but are amazing artists, right? That's why artists have managers, because they're not business people. You don't have to be a business person. You don't have to be an entrepreneur. There's a phrase called entrepreneurship, which is you're working under another entity or individual, but it still allows you to feed your spirit and to give back in a way that's important, inspiring, fascinating, and motivating without you having to take the liability of starting a company. But it comes with that self-insight on, is the vehicle that you're living in, do you walk home at the end of the day or go home at the end of the day thinking that you're inspired, fascinated, and motivated by how you're working, where you're living, who you're doing that with, and the capacity in which you're actually spending your time? And if not, and you've got to be honest with yourself, this isn't a my life is great or my life sucks. This is reality. I'm not saying life sucks. I'm just saying, are you truly inspired and motivated by it? And if you're not, then we have to start identify what needs to change, right? So then it goes into people. Do I feel better or worse about myself after I'm done spending time with you? Do I feel better or worse about myself after I'm done eating my food or spending my time this way or binge watching TV or you start auditing your life in the really, really micro way to start recognizing where there's leakage that you may not immediately identify, but over the course of a year zaps your ability to play into your gift. And then if you want to earn money from it, there are other key players that are already doing something similar. You want to be in personal development? You and I know a lot of people. You're talking to a lot of great people in personal development. You want to be in a business of some kind? Well, there are fantastic people. For every person that is recognized in the media as an authority, there's 20 other people that are just as successful that nobody knows about. Seriously. So, a tactic, when I was building my network of successful people, I literally looked at the richest neighborhoods in my community and I looked at the tax rolls and I saw first name, last name. And then I went to Google and looked up first name, last name, because if they can afford a $23 million house, I bet you they run a pretty big business. And then, hey, first name, last name, I'd love to sit down and talk. You'd be amazed how many people respond. So there are ways to identify how to fill in those gaps. So like you said, you can start to truly monetize, but it all starts from self-awareness. And then the vehicle that you're in needs to play into a way that's profitable, inspiring, fascinating, and motivating.
Oh yeah, I agree with you so much. And when I was doing this summit, reaching out to people like yourself, I was really amazed by how generous and willing that you guys are willing to offer your expertise and time to talk to people like me. So it's so easy to just go on the internet and find those people to talk to and just pick their brains. It's really powerful to be able to do that. So Evan, let's talk about the not so pretty side of things, right? For building a
Let's do it.
business, following your calling. Were there ever a time when you just feel like this is too difficult, I want to give it all up, maybe go back to a 9-to-5 job? Did you have those moments, and what was that like for you?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I think everybody has, because look, we can sit here and we can talk about living in your gift and whatnot, but there's the reality of like, my God, I'm married, and there's the reality of kind of that what if. But for me, it's immediately followed of what if I don't, right? So yes, we can go back to that immediate comfort, but on the other side of short-term comfort is a deeper intimacy with your potential. So what happens if that intimacy doesn't exist? What happens? And that's where my mind goes. But to answer your question, yes, of course I thought that. I mean, when I was leaving and exiting my real estate company, I was exiting a significant and consistent income stream, moving into a significant and consistent expense. I mean, it's expensive to start a company. It's expensive to throw massive conferences. It's expensive to travel around the nation and to meet with people when you haven't even been in business for 2 years. It's expensive to do all of that. So I immediately go from, okay, if we just sit back, like if we don't even work, we're still going to make X, not to mention what happens when we do work, to, hey, I hope we might be able to make a fraction of X if we work our butts off. But, again, that thought is there, but then immediately following it is like leading by example. Some people that are watching this might be parents. If your child says, I want to be great, what do you say? Yes or no? You say, of course you can. Let's help you be great. So if I'm going to help my children be great, and yet I'm defaulting into my comfort, which is playing into my sense of mediocrity, then what friggin' hypocrite am I to go tell my child they can be anything and then go and live a shell and a fraction of what I could be? And so I think about that life, and then it just becomes no question. I'd rather fall and die on my own sword by my own hand, doing what I need to be doing to impact and improve the world, than slide back into complacency and become a hypocrite where I'm speaking out of both sides of my mouth. And I can't live with that. Some people might be able to, but it's just not something that I'm going to accept.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So you asked, what if I don't? That question.
Absolutely.
Wow. So I know you work with a lot of people to help them get success in their life and business. What would you say are like the number one thing that's holding people back from going after that life that they want?
Well, just like you said, there's comfort and stability, and that's it is. I mean, it's extremely, especially if you have some type of success. I mean, if you're at zero, freaking everything looks great, right? I mean, if you're way down at the bottom, you've got, my gosh, you're like, any type of employment would be amazing right now. But you see, I think most people don't start there, especially later in life. I think most people start from some level of comfort. And so what happens is that you start to enter a world that immediately highlights all that you had. And even if you didn't have much, when you kind of dip back down, even that seems great. So I think the first thing is this just intense fear of the unknown. Mm-hmm. And I work with a lot of people that are just scared to pull the trigger, just flat out scared. I'm scared to tell my employees that there's going to be a change in the company. I'm scared to implement these new strategies because what if we lose money? I'm scared to blank, blank, blank. And I believe that when a fear is present, it's because a fear is in motion because you're not. Because when I move, my fear can't move because it's hard to move simultaneously. Because at the end of the day, I can have fear there, but if I'm the one that's executing, then the fear can't execute by default. And so the conversations that I have with people in regards to that is kind of moving around that, well, what's the worst that can happen? Well, I've got a kid and I can't do this to my kid. Of course you can. Of course you can. You're not doing anything to your child. It's just, hey, we're not going to load up on tens of thousands of dollars on Christmas presents this year because we're going to make something happen. But again, that's the micro thinking instead of the macro thinking. Okay, so in this metaphorical conversation, we're talking about, maybe someone's daughter right now. Okay, but what happens in 15 or 20 years? If she says, you know what, I need to go to MIT because I have a brilliant mind and I think I can actually cure cancer and really do it this time. And you're sitting there on your ass and you can't make it happen. You can't give her that opportunity because over those 15 or 20 years, you took the immediate comfort instead of focusing on the long term. So again, there's the fear there. I mean, that's the number one, is just being completely scared. But their basis usually is based on their reality now and not on where that reality could be. In the last question, you've got to ask yourself, what if I don't? And I think it's very similar. It just goes back to that fear.
Yeah. So Evan, I'm really inspired by everything that you have been able to accomplish at such a young age. So like what is in your future right now? What's your vision with your business? Where do you see yourself in just 10 years? You'll be only 36 in 10 years.
That's right. I know I'm going to be an old man. I've got specific things that are in my future. I think for me, it's most important to keep at the forefront. My answer ultimately stems from wherever God needs me to be is where I'm going to move. Because in my life and business, He moves first. In a different standpoint, more tangible standpoint, it's our goal is really for what we're doing here to kind of leverage our strengths and our team and our business as we continue to grow, to be a catalyst for world changers to start changing the world and the environment that they're working in, to equip inspired individuals with the tools and the strategies they need to actually go and build that life they can be obsessed about, to go and live in giftedness, for companies to be profitable, for people to feel inspired, fascinated, and motivated by where they live, where they work, and how. And so the vision ultimately is, right now, my goal is within the next 10 years, I need to have a footprint on every continent, a significant footprint on every continent. And part of that is distributed through great content like this. Part of that is through our podcast, through our conferences that are growing exponentially, through what we're doing. I don't have the exact granular of I need this many numbers and this, because one thing I've learned is that changes very quickly. I just know that if I shoot for having that foothold, that the framework and the profitability and the structure and all the things that we need in order to make that happen are going to have to be significant. And so right now, that's our big focus, is developing those footholds. And that starts with fingerprints first on other people's lives so they can become advocates for what we've done.
Yeah. So Evan, what would you say are some of the biggest rewards that you have been able to achieve by making this decision to follow your calling, to do what you love? Do you have more time now to spend with your wife, Brittany, and doing things that you're passionate about, that so many of us really just don't have that privilege to be able to do outside of, like, say, a 9-to-5 job? They spend their whole time going to work. So what are some of the biggest blessings that came into your life as a result of you following your calling?
Well, the freedom, for one. And when I say freedom, I mean emotional freedom. I mean relational freedom. I mean, there's a distinct freedom to being able to have a guilt-free evening at home with someone that's important to you and just have it be quiet. There is. And there's two types of quiet. There's when you're out of business quiet, and then there's that freedom quiet. And so the biggest thing was, as these other companies that I had run had been built up, they were built in such a way that had so many unbelievable demands that while we have intense demands over here, because we're immediately playing into a framework that allows us to feel inspired, fascinated, and motivated, even when we're working and have long days, we can still go home rejuvenated. And so for me, I spent so many years of my life being exhausted and not exhausted. It's kind of like maybe you have a great workout, like you're exhausted, but you just kind of feel great, versus you just get punched in the freaking face all day. Like it's just another phone call, your phone's ringing and you're watching it buzz. You're just thinking, my God, I don't want to pick that up because if one more thing happens. But then imagine that for like 7 years, 7 days a week. It gets just exhausting. And so it's the freedom to finally end a day in deep and intense rejuvenation It's a freedom to finally start giving back the whole and pure version of myself that the people that are important to me are looking for back to them. It's the freedom to actually find a tangible result between our actions and lives being transformed and impacted. It's the freedom to finally feel significant. Just personally, significance is something that's important, but not significance in an egotistical, like, look at me way, but significance in, if my being dies, my work does not. And so much of what I did would, even my other businesses, in real estate. What's the biggest thing that happens when a house burns down? You think, well, at least we have each other, right? But then what happens if the each other are just shells of the people that you've been looking for? Why don't we go after that? So to be able to walk away from that type of situation and recognize that we can leave these little traces of our work, regardless of me or the people that we work with or the other people that we're trying to influence. That movement and that sense of fulfillment is really hard to find. And it took me a long time to find it.
Got it. So Evan, I want to ask you a question that I feel like my friends, my listeners listening right now probably are thinking. So I know, coming from my personal experience, when I first came out of college, my initial focus was just to find a job to pay off student loans, to pay bills. That was really the only focus, especially we have friends, families telling us, like, what are you doing? You graduated, you have your degree, make use of it. So how do we navigate between those expectations, and at the same time, if there's something calling us that we want to do something totally different, how do we navigate through that phase?
That's a good question. Cycle of healthy obsession. That's how we navigate it. So obsession, when people think of it, they think of a negative obsession. We talked about that. It's a linear experience that starts with overcoming feelings of shame, guilt, and abandonment, and ends in feelings of, well, a lack of regret, or excuse me, a lack of fulfillment and regret. So the cycle of healthy obsession is an emotion, a mindset, and a discipline. It's a point of revelation, preparation, and cultivation. It's a cycle: emotion, mindset, discipline, emotion, mindset, discipline. The reason I bring this up is because you need to recognize what state in the cycle you're at. Okay, so an emotion is a revelation. I have an internal knowing that something needs to change. I can do more. I've recognized my gift. I need to impact the world. You see, one of my favorite quotes by my friend Tim Story is, once you've touched the fire, you can't go back to living in the smoke. That's that revelation. Once you've touched that by recognizing your gift, you can't go back to living in a world that defaults you to your weaknesses. But you see, most people, the problem is they think, I have found it, therefore I must do this. The demands of the people that are important in your life usually stem from, not for everybody, but especially if your relationships are somewhat healthy, they usually stem from an okay place, right? Mom and dad are looking out for me, therefore they want me to get a job. Not because they want me to diminish my gift, but because they don't want to see me homeless on the corner begging for freaking mustard, right? And so it usually stems from that place, but it's important that you, A, communicate, and B, shut out. So when I was making my own transition, I communicated, I'm not asking permission. This is what I'm going to do, right? If your listeners, whoever's watching this, chances are you're probably an adult. So make your own decision, right? And I don't mean to be too, real, but someday those people that have a hand on your life, like, they're not going to be here anymore. Mom, dad don't live forever, right? So what happens when you're 50 and you've been living up to their expectations, and now you don't have anyone to have their expectations on your life, and you're scattered? It's called a midlife crisis to the extreme. And so, but it's A, communicate. This is what I'm going to do. I'm not asking permission. I am gently and compassionately, with grace and space, informing you that my life is changing, and I'm going to let you know that it will change, so you won't be surprised when it does. Okay. And then the other thing is, you need to communicate away from the negativity. You have to sit down and say, if you do, right, we're assuming the relationship is healthy. If it's not, there are other ways you can handle it. But assuming that it's a healthy relationship, it's, I love you and I care about you, but I will not hear that negativity. I don't care if you think I'm going to fail. I don't care if you want me to get a job. Don't hear it. I won't hear it, right? And you have to train that, right, on the phone. Well, I just want you to get the job. I respect that. Don't bring that up again, please. I cannot continue this conversation if that's where it's going to go. You must have boundaries around your mind and fortify your mind, because one day you will wake up doubting yourself, and that's the worst thing that can happen. Okay, so externally, that's how we start to deal with those people. And then internally, we have our own processes. The cycle of obsession, emotion, revelation, you're already past that. Now you move into the next, which is the mindset, which is the preparation. This is working your land. Okay, and we got connected through some podcasts. I think the example that I used was actually this working your land, right? If you're at 7-Eleven and you're an amazing musician and you want to go and you want to make it, and you've got all these tunes and you can impact the world, but you look down and you're still at the cash register. Okay, well now you've had the revelation, now you're in the preparation. So how is the environment that you're in able to foster that better future? Well, now it's an opportunity for you to run that register. It's an opportunity for you to make thousands of tiny little interactions with people and practice making an impact in 15 seconds or 30 seconds or a minute or less. So by the time you're in that noisy club with that one producer that you only have 30 seconds of time, you have perfected the short-term interaction with people and immediately building relationships, right? So it's the internal recognition of, I'm not where I want to be, but thank God I'm not where I'm used to be. And I can work where I'm at right now to help me actually get there. So I'm shutting out the negativity. I'm informing those people so that way they know. And then I'm focusing on what I can do right now in my own space to take me one step deeper, deeper into my giftedness, not one step richer, not one step. I'm going to continue moving in my gift, because when somebody says that they like you, they're not saying they like you. When someone says you've done an amazing thing, they're not saying that you are amazing. They're saying, I'm connected with your gift. You just happen to be the vessel that the gift is coming out of. Therefore, I'm connecting with you. So when you work that cycle and work deeper into your gift, after it becomes refined, it cannot be ignored. You go back to the people that listened earlier and you said, now I'm here. And now you have a gift that can be refined and can be potentially monetized if you want to turn it into an organization. And you've been working. See, I believe that the people that are important to you, that are giving you some of those negativity and doubt that you talked about, stems from because they haven't fully identified that giftedness. Because here's the beautiful thing about gifts. Once it's been identified, it cannot be ignored, which means that you should take responsibility for the fact that they're not actually giving you that support, because it means that deep down, your gift isn't refined enough to become in a spot that they cannot ignore. So got a little excited, but that's probably my recommendation to that situation.
I love that so much. That was a whole game plan that anyone can use if they were in that situation. So thank you for that.
Sure.
To wrap up this interview, Evan, I could talk to you all day because you're just sharing so much amazing wisdom. But to respect your time, I just have a couple of last questions to ask you.
Sure.
So if our listeners listening right now, what would you say are the number one thing, like right when they finish this interview, what can they do right away? The first like action steps that they can take to follow this path towards their ultimate calling and to build this life that they're obsessed about?
Absolutely. So the short action steps would be, we talked about threads of consistency. Think back in your life and try to identify your own. Threads of consistency, how you interact with other people, how you move in specific environments. Think back to highly charged emotional situations, logical, financial, professional. These threads of consistency are really, really important. If you haven't started that process, allow yourself the flexibility and the forgiveness to look inward for a little while and identify those areas that are consistent. So I'd start with threads of consistency. You want to identify the right vehicle. So the environment that you're in, is it inspiring, fascinating, and motivating? And if you can't say for sure yes or no, then get into the minutia of the environment. Again, the people you're spending your time with, the car you drive, the house you drive, the house you live in, the environment that you work in. I do an ideal versus reality. So maybe ride it all out, car, house, all of this. Ideal. I would love to be living in 20,000 square feet. I'm living in 800 square feet. Okay, well then where there's a disconnect, we can start to build towards something tangible in your actual environment to bring inspiration, fascination, and motivation. It's not being unhappy with where we're at, it's recognizing we can do more, and then where that exists. And then the third would be the cycle of healthy obsession and emotion and mindset and a discipline. It's a moment of revelation. It's a period of cultivation, of preparation, and it's a period of cultivation. And that cycle worked in obedience over a long time, produces obsession overflow, which is finally abundance. So the third step is, once we've gone through that, I would really look at the emotion, the revelation, try and write it out and identify it. Where was that moment where you really recognized you could do more? And going back into the mindset, the preparation, how can you use the environment that you're in currently to propel you towards a deeper level of intimacy with your gift, instead of just kind of defaulting by working in that environment where all you're doing is got to make the check and wait for the weekend. And then cultivation, which if you haven't experienced it, those moments where you get to touch that gift, if you haven't experienced it, then that's okay. But cultivation would be these moments in your life where you think to yourself, you're like, oh, this is what life's going to be like. That's cultivation, right? It's the free giveaway where you're able to take a ride on the private jet. It's the first time that I talked to a large group of people and I saw their eyes light up. Cultivation are those moments where you get to experience it. If you've had it, you should identify it so you know where to identify it in the future when it comes back into your life.
Thank you so much, Evan. Wow. I hope our listeners are not only listening to this, but they actually like listen to this interview over and over again and take action, really implement everything that Evan just shared with us. And I just want to take this moment to acknowledge you, Evan. You are someone that I can see. You just know exactly what it is that you want to create and what it is that you want to do with your life. And that really comes off so powerful. And I know that you're touching so many lives out there, and I'm really inspired by you. And I would like to thank you so much for taking the time out today to be on this episode and share your wisdom with our listeners. So I have no doubt that the listeners would love to stay connected with you after this interview. So where can they find you online? And also, I know you have something prepared for our listeners. So if you want to go into that, that would be amazing.
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. So just like we got connected on social, you can find me on social media at Real Evan Stewart. And I'm pretty much anywhere. I need to get my TikTok platform up a little bit because I kind of heard that might be a big deal. So, but I'm super active on Instagram and I try to make myself available. So at Real Evan Stewart, slide into my DMs, let me know your thoughts. I try to be available and accessible to help you as you go along that building a life you can be obsessed about. And then, of course, we had our discussion about really bringing additional value. So one thing that I'm going to be offering to your listeners and the people that are taking their time to be engaged with this summit is a recording of my conference this last year, which was hours and hours and hours and hours of some of the top leaders in business, personal, and professional development talking about the similar thing, the strategies that they've learned. I had people on that stage that have built and exited multi-$100-million companies, thought leaders that are really built to challenge you and help you continue to refine your gift. And I'm happy to offer that for free. It's typically not free. If you want to, if people want to buy it, they can, but I want to make sure that there's an item of value that's a tangible giveaway so they can continue building. And and so this is hours of content to go even deeper if you get excitement about your potential and you want to continue building it out.
Awesome. Thank you. So for our listeners listening, definitely get your hands on that. And that link will be sent to you inside of the same email that this interview was sent out. So make sure you go back and get your hands on that. So Evan, thank you again for being on here. And thank you all of our listeners for tuning in today. Hopefully you got some of the powerful insights that Evan shared with us and take those game plan and action steps into implement into your life. So I'll see you next time. Make sure you tune back in. Bye.
Bye.